This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we've got a very special guest on the podcast today. His name is Al Robertson, and so he is the eldest son of Phil and Miss Kay Robertson, and Phil is the patriarch of the famous Duck Dynasty clan down there in West Monroe, Louisiana. As you guys have known for a while now, I've been friends with them and the family for the last several years. I go down there every summer and I do the Unashamed podcast with, Phil, Jason, Al, and have done a lot of those different things. And so wanted to finally get Al on the show. It kind of occurred to me, like, why in the world have I not talked to Al on the show yet? So I got him on the show, and as I talk about in a little bit, there was kind of a tech snafu, so he couldn't even really see me, so it was kind of funny. So we kind of just, are kicking it and messing around there at the beginning. And I'll go ahead and tell y'all, if y'all are watching this on YouTube or on Rumble, there's just a still shot of me because we had catastrophic problems. So technology, have I told you before how much I hate technology? Because you buy something, you spend all this money, you get it professionally set up, and then you hit the button and the button doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So the camera wasn't showing up, so they couldn't even see me. You couldn't even see me on the other side. But even the backup camera that's supposed to be taking all the video and the whole time, it started, I hit the button, it started recording, and then it just decides, you know what, screw Kyle, screw this interview. I don't want it to keep going, but you know what, Satan, get behind me. All right, we're going to go ahead and release this. Again, I know a whole bunch of you guys watch this on video, but we do have a lot of you on the audio side as well. So if you're looking to see my beautiful, lovely face on this particular interview, you won't be able to see it, but we do have a still shot here for you. But we get an update on Phil Robertson. So as you guys know from several months ago, and as I talked about on the show, that Phil, his health is kind of taken a turn for the worse with, dementia, Alzheimer's, and just some different back issues and things like that. So we do get an update on Phil and Miss Kay's health and kind of what the prognosis is for them. But then, as has been true with any time I talk to a Robertson, you have your best laid plans and then you just end up letting it flow where it goes and ends up being better. We just kind of flowed on the impact his father and, his turnaround and him following Christ and basically 50 dedicated years of sharing the gospel and the impact that that's had on the family, on Al specifically, on me specifically. I told a story that Al had never heard before. Al told me some stories that I'd never heard before. So certainly it'll be first time that our audience is going to get to hear that. And so we talk about those things and we talk about everything that's changed and how that's affected his ministry. But then towards the last part of the conversation, if you know anything about Al and his wife Lisa's story, it's a story of infidelity and forgiveness. So his wife had a long-term affair early in their marriage. And so we talk about him finding out and kind of what he wanted to do. But then we get really, really practical. And the reason is, and I kind of tell him, I get told the worst stories, right? So that's part of the thing is some of you guys don't know me, but you feel like you do because of the show. And so you'll send me these emails or these DMs where you're like, hey, this happened. I just found this out. What do I do? And it's kind of one of those hard things for me to kind of help a lot of you guys with those things, especially if you're sharing things with me that I haven't myself experienced. But he is 25 years past figuring out how he was going to forgive this woman that had hurt him so deeply. And him and Lisa now are helping people restore their marriages, point them to Christ, and the glory that God is getting from what Satan meant for evil is absolutely outstanding and substantial. And so we spend a lot of time talking about that. And so for any of you guys that are maybe be tempted to tune out the latter part of this interview, because we're going to do another interview down in West Monroe later on this summer, and we'll get into the Duck Dynasty stuff and the Duck Commander and some of those things. But guys, if it hasn't happened to you, I hope that it doesn't. I pray that it doesn't, but it might. But even if it hasn't happened to you, this is a woman cheating on you, it's going to happen to one of the dudes. If you've got a foxhole, if you've got a group of guys, it's either already happened or it's going to happen to one of those guys. And being able to understand the mindset of forgiveness and to understand how you should comport yourself and how you can lean on God, lean on the promises and the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ and lay it at the foot of the cross. I mean, the impact is going to be, again, substantial for you guys. So love this conversation. Love that we just kind of weaved in and out of a lot of different things. And it's just always good to talk to my old friend. So I'm not going to keep him from you any longer. So without further ado, let's get into it. Al Robertson, I would give you the normal welcome to the show, but what nobody can see there in YouTube land or the guys listening to this, I can see you, but you can't see me. Do you know why? Because tech is stupid. And so I'm recording in a separate little boxy thing, but you can't see me in your box and everything's dumb. And why is tech so dumb? What's going on, Al?
Well, I'm just laughing. We always, Zach will always say on our podcast, can you hear me? And Jay says, I can hear you. The whole world can hear you. So that's how I feel about you, Kyle. I hear you loud and clear, even though I can't see your amazing chiseled face. But that's all right.
That's right. It's my amazing, strong American jaw. But the funny thing about this, there's something old school about this, because when I first started doing interviews with episode 100, like 600 something episodes ago, no one could see me, right? And then I also couldn't see them. It was audio only, and so you didn't know whenever to cut in and all that. And so if you've got a funny joke that you need to interject, you are at a supreme disadvantage. And so that's just kind of the way that is. But the first thing I got to say is, Al, I've known you for several years. This might be the most trim and aerodynamic I've ever seen you, Mr. Robertson.
Yeah.
So what's up with that? You seem to be on the path.
Well, I wish I could say that, I just finally got to that place where I was sick of it and I decided I had to get myself into shape. But actually, we had a new sponsor on our podcast, and so they said, "Hey, if you'll jump on this diet, we'll sponsor your podcast." So I was like, "All right." So we're getting the gospel out.
That's right.
We'll kill two birds with one stone, and so it's a wonderful group of folks that I've been on a diet about almost 3 months, and am loving it, feeling so much better. Obviously, lost almost 40 pounds.
Wow.
In the last 3 months, so still working on my Kyle Thompson. You're in that far away place down there at the end of my tunnel to get to there, but I'm working on it. So it's all good.
Wow. It's very easy. Dye your beard red, take an enormous amount of steroids, get some tattoos, more tattoos other than just the name Al on your forearm there. I mean, I think we can make this happen for you pretty easy.
You're right. I got to work on my tattoo game. There's no doubt about it. It's funny because Lisa, decides at 50 that she wants to get a tattoo. Yeah. So I've got a couple of old ones. You mentioned one of them. It's on this. Well, where is it? It's right here. Yeah. They can see it there. Yeah. And so it says Al in kind of a crude prison style tattoo I was 16 years old when I got that one, and another one here on my arm that has a heart with the girl I was dating at the time. 16, you think love's forever, but apparently not. And so Lisa's like, I want to get a tattoo. And I was like, babe, I need to get rid of some tattoos. I don't need any new ones. But she finally talked me into it. So we put forgiven on our hand right here. Let's see, there it is. You can see a little bit of it. But so we put that on each other's arms. And it was really funny because my youngest daughter, is like you. She's of the tattoo generation, I call it. And so she took us to her artist. And I said, have you had anybody of your clients? She's a young girl that was doing it. I said, any of your clients that brought their parents in for tattoos? And she said, I think you're the first. She said, although I have had many young people say, please put this where my parents can't see it. And so that happens apparently quite frequently.
Well, since the last time I've seen you, I've gotten quite a bit more work done that you can't see right now. So I'm showing it to the camera. So I'm showing it to the whole world, but just not to you, Al. But don't worry, I'll see you this summer. I've been coming down there once a summer. But that's one of the things I was going to start out by giving you crap about the Dodgers basically spending $7 billion to win baseball games. But I don't even want to talk about it, okay? As a Cardinals fan, I'm frustrated at everything. We're recording this before opening day, and the season's already done for my Cardinals. They're already eliminated. But obviously, I've been coming down there for years now, basically every summer, usually June, July, I come down there, the West Monroe. We record on the podcast. You host me at your house. I just get to kind of hang out in your world and in your family and just kind of get a sense of what y'all are doing. And obviously, the patriarch of y'all's family is Phil Robertson. And, it was released not that long ago that he's having some health issues and he's no longer doing the Unashamed podcast and everything. But then if you search online, that's it. That's all that anybody gets, and we don't really have any updates. And so if you wouldn't mind giving the update to our audience, how's Phil doing? What are things looking like for him?
Well, it kind of continues to go in the wrong direction. Unfortunately, he we had started noticing on the podcast maybe a year and a half ago. I don't know if you noticed it last year.
About two years ago when I was on, you could tell he wanted to get in, but he couldn't find his spot.
Yeah, and so what was happening was, in our family, we've seen it with every one of his siblings, everyone except for one, and then Si, we don't know. Dad has said it, and by the way, we can laugh about this. We do as a family, and Dad did too before, but he says that Si was born with dementia. We just got used to it. So
yep, that's how it goes.
We know, and but everybody's had it, and so we kind of knew the warning signs to look for. In fact, Jan, Zach's mom, is the one who led Dad to Christ, and she had it as well, and unfortunately passed away at 69. But so we kind of began to see the warning signs, just couldn't grab words, and was having trouble keeping up on the podcast, and we hung in there as long as we could with him doing that because we were trying to keep him, as sharp as he could be. But it just got to that place where it was more frustrating for him. And so first he stopped being on the podcast, and now, unfortunately, he's just got to where he has a really hard time communicating. A lot of stuff is just random and kind of nuts. And so we're in that place where, we're praying, for him to be as good as he can be on any given day. Some days he's a little bit better than others. But he has a hard time remembering hardly anything, sometimes us, from time to time. So it's a very cruel thing to watch for somebody so sharp. But our approach, Kyle, has been we've lived our whole lives for eternal life and for impacting as many people as possible. And so I was reminded this last Sunday when I was in Kentucky, listened to a guy preach, and he read that verse that Paul said, my life is a drink offering and it's poured out. And I just thought, you know what? That's my dad. He poured everything into the 50 years when he became a Christian, and it got to the point now where he can't do what he used to do, but he's trained all us to do it. And so we were a bit of a crossroads with our podcast because we parted ways with Blaze at the same time when Dad was leaving our podcast, and we weren't sure. We were praying about it. What do we want to do? Do we want to keep doing this? Do we want to keep trying to impact? And to be honest with you, it was Dad's legacy that said, you guys keep going. I mean, we're still unashamed. We're still laying out exactly what Christ has done in our lives, and now we feel almost double the urgency to continue what he started. So, not great for him. He's having a lot of back issues as well. So the prayers, people ask me, what do I pray for? And I say, look, we're praying that when his time is there, when the Almighty is ready for him to cross over, it'll happen. And I'm at the point in my life where sooner rather than later would be better just because there's not a lot of positives. So that's what I'm praying for. That's what I hope folks are praying for us, and that we can just be strong. We're kind of rallying the troops as a family to be there, to visit, to bring him some food, and hopefully catch those conversations that are a little more lucid than others. Mom is doing better. A lot of people have asked about her. She's had a lot of issues as well, and she's been in rehab for a couple of weeks now. She's been having some falling issues, but she's doing much, much better. And the plan is for her to be able to be with Dad because they do much better together. Mom's kind of Dad's North Star at this point. So that's really the one he recognizes every time. So we're hoping to get them back together in the same place very, very soon. So that's kind of the latest update on the folks.
Well, we appreciate that update. I know a lot of guys in our audience are concerned and very prayerful people. And as you were talking, Al, I was just thinking the phrase that came to mind is just finish well.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of Christians that they burn hot, for a certain period of time, maybe right after they get saved or maybe when they're in their peak earning years or whatever the thing is. But then they just don't really finish well. I was having a conversation with a guy the other day whose father is not exactly in the process of finishing well, and it has nothing to do with his health. It only has to do with his mindset. And, he was concerned and he asked me, Kyle, what are the easy practical things I can do to get him to care? And I'm like, there aren't any. There's nothing you can do to get someone to care. You can't, lose weight for somebody else. You can't read the Bible for somebody else. You can't do things for somebody else. Ultimately, they have to do it. But this is certainly a different situation. But his legacy is secured in terms of the spread of the gospel, in terms of the impact he's had on people. And I am just personally thrilled that the podcast is continuing to go because you guys inspired us on our show to do the forging table where me and 3 other laymen get around and we read the Bible and we study the Bible, one chapter at a time, one book at a time, 1 hour at a time. And that has had more of an impact, Al. I'll tell you this, and then I'll turn it back over to you. I was at y'all's church last time and actually went to church with you, got to see you preach for the first time, which was great. This was last summer. And I had a gentleman come up to me and he says, hey, are you Kyle with Undaunted.Life? And I was like, yes, I am. And I got to, meet him and, talk with him a little bit. But then after service, he came up to me with his wife and his children. And he said, look, because of your show, which is not true, but he said, because of your show, I'm studying the Bible deeper than I ever have. I'm doing jujitsu. I've lost a bunch of weight. I've gotten a lot stronger. I've done this, that, and the other thing. And I just look over at his wife and I say, ma'am, is all of this true? And with tears in her eyes, she's like, yes, he's a completely different man. And I just kind of told him, I'm like, look, man, I didn't do any of that stuff. Like, I didn't love your wife as Christ loved the church for you. I didn't work out for you. I didn't go to jiu-jitsu class for you. And guess what? The forging table wasn't even technically my idea. I stole it from the Robertsons, right? Where we just get around the table and it's just normal dudes having normal biblical conversations and modeling that for the rest of humanity. I mean, y'all, the impact y'all have had, y'all are never even going to know the extent of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which is what you want. Like you said, there are others out there like the gentleman you mentioned, and that's why you do it. And when we started Unashamed Podcast, our mindset was, in that time we were with Blaze, and so we were a conservative political platform. And so the mindset was, but we want people to be able to sort of look in from the living room of how we grew up, which was studying the Word of God and inspiring each other to impact other people. And that was from the get-go. That was what motivated us, and that's how we grew up. And so that mindset is what we have carried forward. And you're right; there have been many who have started either a podcast or a Bible study at their church or a new endeavor to impact people, and that's what we're looking for. Because look, we're only here for a certain amount of time. Jesus has brought the idea of heaven to earth, and we want to impact as many people as we can during that process. So that's why we keep going, and that's why we're excited about you doing what you're doing, and so many other people, because all of us have a different lane that we impact people in, and you do as well. So we're super proud to be partners with you, and it's always good to have you every year on our podcast.
Well, and I can already feel myself just welling up a little bit with emotion because this was such an impactful thing on me. But it was last summer, and so I know Phil was, or no, this would have been the year before, because we did the podcast, and then I hung out with your dad afterwards, and we recorded another podcast, just him and me, for my show about the release of another one of his books.
Yep.
And it was one of those things where I'm like, I could plan this thing out to the nth degree, and it's going to be, I might as well just crumble it up and throw it away immediately. I just need to let Phil flow is basically what I need to do. So that's what we do for about an hour. It's great. It's wonderful. And then as soon as the podcast is over, and your dad's not like, a real touchy-feely guy. He's not a real, like, let's sit around and chit-chat type of guy. Like, he finishes what he's doing and he moves on to the next thing. But as soon as the recording stops, he puts his headphones down and he walks around the table and he puts a hand on me and says, you're amazing. No matter what happens, you just keep going, right?
Right.
Like, if you get discouraged or whatever, and I had some bombs dropped on my life in the last year or so, and I can just go back to that time with Phil Robertson, who didn't need to say a thing to me.
Yeah.
He could have just said, "All right, Kyle, have a good rest of your day. Safe travels back home." But he was just like, "You keep going. You keep spreading the good news, and you keep doing your thing." And the year before that, I was about to go speak at Lewisburg Prison in Pennsylvania, and I remember, y'all talking about your dad going to Angola prison down there in Louisiana, and I talked to your dad on the phone, like, teach me, like, what would you say to these men? And he's just like, he gave me my line. You can be under lock and key, but you can still be free.
Yeah.
And we had 36 guys give their lives to Christ that day at Lewisburg Prison when I went and spoke there. And it was the line that your father gave me that had the most impact. And so, I mean, again, legacy secured, but yeah, go ahead and hop back in on that. On
No,
any of that.
I was going to say, and I didn't know that. You'd never told me that until right now about the afterwards. That's that makes me feel so good, because Dad, the thing about it is he was always so laser focused. You're right. He a lot of times he didn't have those extra moments to do, but as he got later in life, he understood the value of that, of what that would mean to you, beyond his ability to say those words again. And so I love that about him, that he understood that as he went along, that it's important that people understand that I'm leaving them something of me to then carry forward. But I was going to give you an update on, I got a call from the guy who is our prison guy at Angola. And the last time we spoke there, which, by the way, let me say this first. I just jumped in my mind. Dad, out of nowhere, before he got like he is now, he told me that he wanted me to reach out to Angola, and because Franklin Graham told Dad that Angola prison had made a casket for Billy Graham. He back in the day, they used to make a lot of caskets, and as part of their work program inside the prison, and that's what he wanted to be buried in. And Franklin had told Dad, he said, and so I've ordered one and have one for Jane and I, for when we pass on. He said, there's something about the idea of people being set free, and the idea that we can bring that. And so Dad asked me to to get him a casket made in Angola. And so it took me a little while to reach the right people, and they were more than glad to do it. It's not something they do for everybody, obviously, but that they did it for Dad because of the impact. And so it's made. I just have to figure out a way to get it, from Angola up to here. Even though we're not needing it right away, I just love that he was still remembering that. I can't believe he remembered it, to be honest with you, but he did. But this guy from inside the prison called us that works inside for us, CR inside. And he told me, he said, last time your dad was there, they had piped his message. We were in a group of about maybe 800 guys in one of the camps. And it was tremendous. The worship was amazing. And so a lot of people had come to Christ in that moment. But he said they had piped us all over the prison, including into death row. And that there were 5 prisoners that had given their lives to Christ on death row. So, I mean,
wow.
Literally, this is like those words you spoke earlier, Dad spoke, were true for these guys. And then one of those guys, one of those 5, was up for execution. I don't know if it's happened or not yet, but it was up this year. And was going to happen, but he was calling me to tell me this guy is saved and he's the son of God now. And it happened because you guys came into Angola and spoke truth. And so, it warned me again to why you do what you do, why you do the same thing, Kyle. And it's just, man, all glory to God when you get an opportunity to someone, these are the guys that were in the vineyard in the last hour that got the same coin as the other guys, the same payment. And it's like, hey, as long as you get it figured out, that's what you do, and we're telling the guy's story, and so that's the impact of him and his life as well.
Hey guys, real quick. As you've heard me describe before, I am incredibly conservative about the supplements that I take. I spent years being terrified of putting different products in my body because I didn't know what they were made with or if it was going to be kind of fly-by-night companies using all kinds of crazy ingredients. So I've always wanted to partner with an American company that only uses the highest quality ingredients, and that's why I want to remind you that we are partnered with Jocko Fuel. Jocko Fuel is Jocko Willing's supplement company that is based here in the United States. So what are some of my favorite products that they make? So they make whey protein powder, and guys, they just released a cookies and cream flavor not that long ago, and it is ridiculously good. Make sure you use it with milk. It makes it even better. They also make clean energy drinks. I finally decided what my favorite was, and that's pink lemonade. That is my favorite of all their flavors. But they also have the best tasting greens powder on the market. I prefer the peach flavor myself. They also make pre-workout and ready-to-drink protein. So I actually mix the ready-to-drink protein in my boys' milk, and they love it. They're constantly like, Dad, banana milk. So we got to hook that up in the Thompson household. But I also use their krill oil, fish oil, creatine, vitamin D, and their sleep aids. And guys, they've got new stuff coming out all the time and a bunch of stuff I didn't even have time to mention. Guys, if you take your health and wellness seriously, then you simply can't afford to put cheap and inconsistent supplements inside of your body. Try Origin out today by going to www.jockofuel.com. That's jockofuel.com. Use the promo code Undaunted to get 10% off your order. Again, that's jockofuel.com, promo code Undaunted to get 10% off your order. One thing about this, Al, correct posture is also important. So one thing that I try to do is, because I have a weird job, I get up on stage with a microphone attached to my face, and so I'm kind of the center of attention for an hour. But before I go speak, I typically mix and mingle around with the people that are there that I'm speaking with, just to kind of get a sense of the room, to kind of let people know, hey, I'm just a normal guy.
Yep.
Like if they ask me questions about me, I turn it around and ask them, questions about them and their life and their family and that type of stuff. But I did the same thing at Lewisburg Prison, which I wasn't supposed to do. The guards were not thrilled that I did that with the guys that were coming in, because it was not compelled attendance. Whoever wanted to show up could show up, and I'm supposed to stand there in the front as they bring the guys in, and I just, I kind of made up my own rules. It's kind of my thing. And I just start like mixing and mingling and talking to the guys and shaking their hands. And the whole time out, I know I'm shaking hands with guys that have taken human life with those hands, that have held women and potentially children down and abuse them with those hands, all the things, right? I'm aware of that. But the first words out of my mouth were, guys, you've broken the laws of man. That's why you're here, and that's why I get to leave, right? Whenever all this is done. but all of us in this room have broken the laws of God. So in that way, we are brothers. So can we dispense with all of the I'm somehow different than you stuff before we get going?
Yeah.
And you want to talk about wide eyes. I mean, these guys, at that point, they hadn't had someone come speak at Lewisburg prison for years.
Yeah.
These men had basically been forgotten, right? And so here I am, the first guy that they've seen as a guest come in and talk to him, and I'm sitting there wearing a stab vest being like, hey, we're the same thing. Like, and I did the same thing as I was walking around, but a lot of that is a downstream, benefit of your dad. Basically, look at his life. Look at where his life could have gone had Christ not said, okay, that's enough, Phil. Like, we're changing the entire trajectory of your life, and he just picked him up out of the muck,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Dad related to that as from his own life, and anybody that's seen The Blind understands what it's like to be locked up in your own prison, and yet to be released by Christ because you finally submit and give in. And so, I'm like you, Kyle. I try to do the exact same thing with folks. We'll go somewhere and they'll say, "Now, do you guys want to just like be in a room and then come out and speak?" I'm like, "Oh no,
No way.
I want to be out there with the folks. I like to press the flesh, and meet people." And like you, because I want them to know we're coming from and Lisa and I are very transparent. In fact, it's interesting. I wasn't necessarily a big lawbreaker of human law myself when I was a prodigal son, but I was in a situation in New Orleans when I was 18 years old where someone attacked me. But I was having an affair with his wife, and so like I was breaking all of man's law in terms of doing the right thing by another human being, as well as what God wanted me to do. And because of that, this guy was ready to, end my life in this situation, and it was a police officer that was there to handle the situation for the city of New Orleans that is the one that turned me around. I mean, he saw that verse that says, make the most of every opportunity. He saw that as a reality. And so when he sat down next to me after everybody else had left and had a conversation with me, anybody could have said anything at that moment, and I was finally ready because I was broken. And it reminds me so much of people in jail or just coming out, which we deal with a lot of CR guys that are right out of jail, but they don't want to go back. They don't want to continue this life and being addicted to drugs and all the things that have wrecked and ruined every relationship they've ever had. So when those opportunities are there for people, it's people like us that have to be willing to say, we're ready to tell you what changed us. And it's exactly what happened to me. And I literally left New Orleans 2 weeks later and headed home and have never looked back. But I'll never forget that peace officer. In that case, he really was, because he brought peace to me. And look, I don't know his name. I couldn't pick him out of a lineup, but I can tell you this: when we cross over to the other side, I will find that man, and I will say that conversation you had turned me around. If he doesn't already know it, he will when we get to the other side.
Man, there's so many good stories that come out of this. And I guess the through point with all of this, Al, is you are the eldest son of Phil and Miss Kay. And so Jace got to experience a little bit of that, but Willie and Jep didn't really get to experience as much of your dad before Christ. But I mean, you were there. Like you were of age. You have the memories from that time. And again, yeah, guys, if you haven't seen The Blind at this point, it's, we've talked about it on the show quite a bit. It's been out there. It's a, dramatized version of that life, but it's also in a way a sanitized version, because the things that were going on were worse than what y'all could certainly show on a family friendly movie. But give us a little bit of a 30,000 foot overview of what it was like growing up in that household and how that personally affected you and your faith. Because as you know, Al, because you've been in ministry for a long time now, there are guys that can't fathom a good heavenly father because their earthly father is such a heaping pile of garbage. You know what I mean?
No doubt. And in fact, it's ironic that we're talking about this, because this came up in the last podcast because Zach is in town this week, and so he was actually in studio, and so the movie came up, and so we were talking about it, and Jace was saying, he had saw the first cut. I only saw the finished cut, and he was like, he was telling Zach, "Oh, this is rated R. This is never going to fly," And so they had to trim it, as you said, to get it into that sort of PG-13 category, because we grew up in a rated R life, and and that was the reality, and we really couldn't even show it all for what as it really was. It was that bad and worse. And so you're right. I grew up with that. I saw it. It impacted me probably more than I realized at the time. And by the way, this is what happens when you lead a life that's, outside of Christ. You not only impact yourself, but every relationship, including your kids, because, they then have to deal with that at some point in their own lives. And so it's exactly what happened to me. But there was always a providential hand that was there for me. And it was amazing to look back and see. I mean, there was a preacher just up the street who he and his wife, she was blind, and they were older, and they still managed to take me, even though I was in the worst thing. I had this little respite, 2 or 3 times a week where I got out of that place and into some place that talked about God. And, looking back on it, it was kind of a legalistic kind of setting, a place that I would probably be in there trying to get them to understand grace now. But, when you were a kid in a terrible situation, it was a place of peace and safety, and I didn't have to worry about gunfights and, people having fisticuffs right in front of me. So, all those things I look back and see were just these road signs along the way. And I think all that has led me to a place where I can talk to anyone. I mean, it's just that which God has blessed me with, I want to bless other people with. And so when people come in and talk to Lisa, and it happens every time. I mean, not just we're in front of audiences, but when we're home, I mean, there's always somebody that's coming to my house that we're meeting with, that, hey, we're going to run down, we'll meet you at the church, that has a terrible story of a terrible situation. And the reason they call us is because they know they won't be judged, and they know they won't be rejected. I mean, it's an open message because it's an open door. And I think sometimes you have to live through some things to be that kind of person. And look, again, everybody has their lanes and has their way of impact, but that's just what God did in our situation. And I think, when I came back to Christ at 18, I was able to then take all those things of my life and be able to just totally give them over to God. And, I've never looked back in terms of ministering to people.
Well, Al, I think you're onto something here, because I remember speaking to a guy previously, and I think I've talked about this on the show, but this was a guy that was saved at a young age, and I think his dad was a pastor and kind of one of those situations. And here he is in his 50s, and he's kind of lamenting his upbringing and like, hey, I don't know that I've had huge impacts. I don't have a great story. I don't have a whatever. And I remember that he had a couple of granddaughters. And I said, hey, do you want your granddaughters to have an exciting testimony or a boring one? And his eyes got as big as saucers, and he was like, oh my gosh, I want them to have boring testimonies. And I'm like, yeah, why? Because for little girls to have, exciting testimonies, that means they've made some bad decisions or some really bad, evil things have happened to them. But if you go through that fire, at some point, you're probably going to realize that you weren't in the valley of the shadow of death alone. That's the thing about that psalm, is he's with you in the valley. Yep. It's not that he allows you to skip the valley. He teleports you out of the valley. No, he's there with you. And so if he's allowing you to be exposed to this negativity, to this darkness, to this, tribulation, you have to assume that he's bringing you through it for a reason. And so as you just elucidated there, Al, part of your reason is you can talk to anybody. You're not this kid that had this insulated lifestyle where you were never exposed to negativity and you didn't smoke, you didn't drink, you didn't do anything bad. It was just one of those things where you can speak the language of somebody and kind of come their direction a little bit more. It makes you a better pastor overall.
No doubt. And I so agree with what you just said, because I've raised my kids and my grandkids with that idea in mind. Look, we there's no way that Ma'am and I want you to repeat our mistakes. That's why we're open and willing to tell you about them. Learn from our mistakes instead of making your own. And we know, nobody's perfect, but you'd rather not have just, these baggage, these huge suitcases full of junk where, you don't have to do that. I mean, Christ's love can carry you all the way through. You don't have to have that, relationship, but you still have to have that same wonder and awe. But, it's amazing. I was going to tell you about this. So we did a marriage refresh for our church a few weeks ago, when we do it every year. And so now it's gotten so big, partly because Elise and I are around the country. So a lot of people come in that aren't even from our church, which we've welcomed that. So we have 2 weekends that we rent this facility, and it's full of couples, and it's just an amazing time. But Lisa and I could only be there for one. But the year before, last year, this young man from Arkansas and his wife were at the retreat. And his wife comes in like after the first day, and she's like telling me a little bit about her husband. So I'm looking around, but he's not there, which, everybody there is a couple. And so she's telling me, that they had just had the most amazing thing. The reason they were there was because her husband had been to see the blind, and it had such a huge impact on him. He's committed his life fully to Christ, and their marriage, she felt like, was now finally about to take off. And this had all been just like a month. In fact, we showed the movie at the Refresh because it had just come out, so it was a year ago. So I was like, well, where is he? Is he with you? And she said, yeah, he's outside. He's too embarrassed to come in and tell you this. He wanted me to do it first. I said, well, tell him to come in. He doesn't have to be embarrassed. And so, and their mentor couple was kind of standing over in the corner, watching, because they're the ones that got them to come. And so he brings it. Goes out. He comes in. He's very humble, and he sits down. He says, I really don't know where to start. I said, well, just tell me a little bit about your story. And he does. And so it was amazing. It was, he told me the movie, and he said, it impacted me so strongly because it was everything where I was, that I couldn't even speak to my wife driving home from the theater. And of course, she had gotten him to go because she knew he was a big fan of the show, but he had no idea, what was going to happen in that movie theater, to show you how the gospel has a way of impacting through all these different mediums, to impact people. And so, he gets home and he just literally goes to his knees. And so it starts their process. So fast forward to this year. And again, I show up. At this point, Lisa and I can't be a part of the planning of it. So I'm just like, tell me when I'm speaking and I'll be there. We show up. Well, this couple is giving their testimony. So we're a year removed from when I met them last year, and they were one of our testimony couples. And watching that young man stand up there and talk about how, and he had never spoken publicly about his addiction to porn, and talking about how that and many other things had now been unleashed and broken apart because of his commitment to Christ and what he was willing to do. And by the way, Kyle, he wanted to start a podcast. And so afterwards, he and I were having this whole conversation about hooking him up with our guys to be able to start his own podcast, because he has a story to share. And it's the story of Jesus. And it just moved me. I couldn't wait to get back home to tell Dad. And he was having a good day and had some awareness. And I said, Dad, you remember when we talked about doing this movie? I said, let me tell you about this young man that I just met, and now this is what he's doing. He's on fire for Christ. And his wife, I love this, his wife looked at him when he talked about the porn thing, and his whole like countenance, he got real tense, and he pulled his hat down lower on his eyes when he was talking. And it was like he was stepping over that last thing to like be open about something that had gripped his life for most of his life. And his wife looked at him and said some amazing things. She said, he's never said that in public. And she looked at him, she said, I'm so proud of you. And I was just in tears, because I was like, not only this guy had like the drinking and all the stuff that was connected to Dad, but like everything in his life, he was finally willing to give to Christ and say, this has a hold on me no longer. And so it was just such a moment for me to witness. And I was just so proud for, the fact that God has worked through people's lives in my family, and especially Mom and Dad, just see that moment, And so he texts me from time to time now. That's been a couple months ago, and says, hey, I'm up and running. We're about to get our podcast going. So it's just like you were saying. I mean, it's just, that's what you do. It's one beggar at a time. If it hits a bigger group, that's awesome. But you know what? Just if one guy is the impact for me.
Well, and the thing is, I remember before the movie was out, I don't know how I was privy to this conversation, maybe while I was down there, at different points your dad was like, not really feeling this whole movie idea, because, it's one thing when I think I remember when y'all did a family screening, your dad sitting there, we know the ending of the story, right? Everyone in there kind of knows where everything is now, but you're having to watch, a character playing you, and just the vitriol and the violence and the negativity and the sinfulness. And it kind of overwhelmed him a little bit. Like, my goodness, like, yeah, it's great to be redeemed. But when you're reminded of the muck and the mire and what you drug your family through, it's so substantial. But his guiding light was like, man, if people can be saved because this movie helped the Holy Spirit move, or not that the Holy Spirit needs help, guys, don't send me any theological emails, but like, that's the thing, is like, this is a conduit through which the Holy Spirit can do its work,
Yeah, and you're exactly right. That's why he was hesitant and about the whole idea. And the reason why, he was just very honest. I mean, he looked at me because they kind of send me, and I'm the Phil Whisperer, and so they send me in to talk to him and just to kind of see if he's willing to do this. And he said, Al, I mean, would you want the worst parts of your life on a movie screen? I said, Dad, not really. I mean, I get where you are. And if they took that 4-year period of my life where I was at my worst, I mean, that would be very embarrassing. But I said, Dad, we talk about this all the time. You've been talking about it for, at this time, almost 50 years. And, I'm telling you, it's going to have an impact. He said, do you think it'll lead some to Christ? I said, no, I don't think it. I know it will lead some to Christ. And so he was like, well, I'm in. And so that really is what led him to make that call for us to do it. But like I said, it's just another medium by which to tell a story. And you mentioned that about knowing the end. It's like the Titanic. I mean, why did they make $1 gazillion off another movie about the Titanic? You already know the thing sinks at the end, but it's such, some stories are so compelling, you're willing to watch it even though you know how it's going to end. And so that's exactly, I think, what happens with The Blind. And I got to tell you, I don't know, I hate to ruin this for people that hadn't seen it, but at the end, when the screen goes to black, and I had not seen the movie the first time we watched it, so I'm in a theater like for the screening you mentioned. And when all of a sudden Dad's current voice starts speaking, and then he pops on screen, I mean, a chill came over me. That, I mean, it was amazing. I get chilled now just thinking about it, just because I wasn't expecting. I didn't know that. I knew we had done an interview, but I didn't. I thought it was just for like outtakes or whatever. So I didn't know it was actually going to be part of the film, where he's able to then say, hey, this is why you saw this movie. And so that it was and that was Jason's idea, by the way, who said we need to have Phil on there, like current dad talking, and they did it, and I thought it just capped it so beautifully, because it really speaks to why we did this, and Dad felt much better about it, knowing that he could directly link his life to the gospel of Christ.
Well, and that's what ministry is. Ministry is not about providing a sanitized version of your life and your upbringing to prove something to somebody else. And you get these people where you just wonder where the theology comes from. It certainly doesn't come from deep Bible study, but they think, man, since I became a Christian, things are just worse. Like, I have less money, I have more trouble with my family, I have more trouble with my wife, I have all this strife. But I tell guys all the time, especially guys that I coach. We have a coaching program called Dominion that we accept a certain number of guys per year that I do basically one-on-one coaching with them. And I tell these guys when they sign up, I was like, dude, you just put a target on your back, okay? Yep. Because you were on the sidelines, you were sitting on the couch, and Satan doesn't have to really worry about guys like that. That's the easiest thing for Satan to do, is to get you to take yourself out of the game. But now it's like, no, I'm going to get serious about spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. I'm going to get serious about pushing back darkness. Now all of a sudden, these guys are like, yeah, man, I'm having problems in my business, and I'm having employee issues, and gosh, my kids are going crazy and all that. I'm like, brother, tell me something that's going to shock me, because none of that does.
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, we were just doing a marriage event in Kentucky, as I mentioned earlier, and one of the things that I do is I like to talk to men about Job 31, which is an amazing chapter where Job is defending his character, because he said he had the worst support group in the history of support groups.
Oh my gosh!
I mean, the three dopey friends who came along supposedly to help, just like piles on this guy and gives all these speeches about how bad he is. And at the end of it, he's like, man, I don't know what to do, because here's my life. And so he lays that out. And so I love that chapter. Everybody knows the first verse, I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a girl, because, we understand porn and its addiction rate on men. But the rest of that chapter, you're missing so much more good stuff in there. And so I go through that chapter with guys in a marriage context, and Lisa does Proverbs 31. But what I love about it is Job was a guy who was engaged in the game, as you just said. He wasn't a guy sitting on the sidelines. And only because he was engaged, Satan literally tried to knock the daylights out of him, and took so much from him. And the Almighty was in theater to watch it and to see, but he had so much trust in Job that he would do the right thing. And so when I think about him, like, being there for us in the game, like saying, no, if you get it, look, it's not going to be easy, it's going to be rough, but what in your life that's meaningful doesn't have an attachment of being difficult? I mean, every good thing I've ever done I'm in the middle of this diet right now. Is it easy? No way. And it's just a little thing, but it's like, you have to be committed. You have to be willing to go to the mat for whatever you're doing. And when it comes to spiritual life, it's the exact same way.
Well, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to, just like with all the times I've talked to your dad, I'm just going to blow up my plan because I was going to say, hey, let's talk about, how you got into ministry and Duck Dynasty and coming back to the family business. All that's fine. But guess what? This is what we're going to do. This summer, when I come up there, we'll do our unashamed thing, but then you and I will have another little sit down and we can talk about the Duck Dynasty. We can talk about all that stuff. So all you guys can get your red meat. But I want to keep this ministry through point going because there are a lot of really cool things about what I do, Al. The guys I get to meet, the people that I get to give exposure to or get exposure from, it's a great thing. But one of the less fortunate things, or I guess one of the heavier burdens that I have to carry, is when guys share things with me that they haven't shared with anybody else.
Yeah.
Guys that have experienced abuse, guys that have been abusers, guys that have had horrible things happen to them, guys that have done horrible things. And, I get these questions out that I'm not qualified to answer, and I don't even pretend to be qualified to answer. And I don't just want to give them the church answer or pray about it, but sometimes that's all we're left with.
Yeah.
And, that's not nothing. But obviously, there's a large part of your story where inside of your marriage with you and Lisa, there was infidelity, but then there was this long road to forgiveness. And because you and Lisa walked through this road of this muck, you're able to stand on stage and help people with their marriages and get them reset and put them on a pathway that still leads them and guides them to the loving arms of Christ, if you will. And so that's one of the things, Al, in the last year and a half, I've been around a bunch of guys who never thought it would happen to them, but here they are. They've found the text messages or they caught their wife in the act or something like that. And we never hear about that. We never hear about the gal being the one perpetrating the affair. Oh, it's always the guy. It's always the guy's a piece of garbage. How dare he do this? What a poor lady. And the problem is Al, my audience is a bunch of tough guys, right? A lot of tough guys. Like these guys are former law enforcement or military or current law enforcement and military. These are fighters. These are dudes that, are on their way to the job site most days. These guys, don't work in an air-conditioned office all the time. And that's a lot of guys in this audience. So if something like that happens to them, guess what they turn to? Nothing positive. It's usually violence, retribution, getting their own justice, alcohol, pills, or they decide one day that's it and they just eat a bullet.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to kind of shift the conversation to that because that is one of the cornerstones of the Robertson ministry is what you and your wife have been able to do for other people. So let's get our way into that and kind of rip off the Band-Aid and talk about that because I think it'll be of benefit to a lot of guys in our audience.
Well, two things, and I'm so glad you brought it up because this is a huge part of what we talk about in our time together with couples. Again, we're just shotgunning with a group of people, and you don't know, but in every audience there are people struggling just with what you said. And so two things. One, I saw this modeled from my mom because in my family, Dad was that person. And we wound up found a sister, or she found us, at 44 years old because of this period of his life. And it's not like we didn't know there was infidelity, but, they never talked about it. We knew it was a part of their lives. But then all of a sudden, when your sister shows up and she's 44, you have to look back and say, okay, here we go. My mom, when she found that out, said these words. She looked at Dad, and literally, because Lisa and I were there in the moment. So you're reading a letter that says, I think I'm your daughter. And then I had talked to her, and so I knew already, even before the blood test, that this is our sister. And Mom looks at Dad and says, I've always wanted a daughter for, since we've been married, and now it's taken me 44 years to get one. And that, it's just it was an amazing statement. But what it told me was, as I was sitting there, I teared up because I thought, you know what? She forgave him 44 years ago, or she wouldn't be able to make that statement all these years later. Because all of a sudden, this was fixing to be, a whole new thing for our life. We're well known. We've got to figure out how we're going to tell the world about this. I mean, this wasn't like it was a small moment. And yet her first instinct was, I've got a daughter now, even though it wasn't her daughter. And so I looked at that and I thought, oh man, what a validation for my own life. And so in my case, we were 15 years into our marriage, and Lisa had been having an affair for 14 months. So this is not this was 14 months of me thinking I was completely insane. because as anybody in this audience listening to you knows, when you're going through this and you know something's not right and you're trying to get to truth and you in your gut, you think you know what it
Yeah.
is, but the last thing you want to do is say this is what it is, because if that happens, then we got to deal with this. So you're hoping all the time it's something else, that it's not that. And then when it turns out that it is, it's just like it turns your whole world upside down. And certainly that's what happened for me. And in my case, Lisa had a sort of an emotional affair 10 years earlier. And so this was not the first time, that it happened in our marriage. And so therefore, because of that, all of my Christian friends and all my spiritual, network around me was like, well, Al, she's probably not going to change. There's just something wrong with her, And again, they're hurting for me. And so they're trying to just help me get through a moment. But they're basically saying you need to cut her loose. The thing about it was, Kyle, I knew deep down I love this woman. I didn't want this to be the end, but I knew it wasn't up to me. Like, I couldn't share her. We can't share our wives with anybody else. I mean, we're committed to 100% faithfulness because that's what God says He is to us. So I'm convinced that's why we can't share our spouses with someone else. I mean, it just goes against everything in us. So I knew I couldn't do that. So the part of her deciding she wanted to be faithful to God and faithful to me was up to her. But then it quickly shifted to me within a few months of us being separated that, well, can I possibly go forward? Because how do I do this? I mean, I know what God has done for me. And so to speak to your audience that may be struggling in this arena, I'll tell you this. Here's what I did. I could not trust my wife, but I loved her and I wanted to go forward. And I was convinced she wanted to change her life as well, because that was obviously a big part of the problem here. So in that, how do you go forward? Because people kept asking me, well, how are you going to trust her? And I was like, I have no idea. And like you said, I was praying about it, but these prayers were wrestling prayers. This was Jacob in Genesis 28, and 32, 38. The idea was as we're going through this wrestling process, God, what can I do? And here's where I landed. And here's where I want your folks and your audience to listen. You land because you have the capacity to trust in God's forgiveness. Everyone knows why every time Jesus talks about forgiveness, He says, forgive someone else as Christ has forgiven you or as God has forgiven you. It always links back to Him. And what He's given you is the way. That's the pathway. Because I looked deep inside my own soul and the Almighty through the Holy Spirit that was living in me, and I said, how can I do this? And the word I got back from the Holy Spirit was, you can only do this if you trust me. I'm the only one trustworthy enough. You can trust me to somehow get you through this. And so that's where I started. I started with that, and I said, Lord, I want to forgive her. And if I forgive her, I know what that means. That means I have to forgive like you forgave. So that means I have to not use this to hurt her or us going forward. And that means I'm going to have to hold my tongue, because there are going to be moments. I knew there were going to be moments where I wanted to just like go back and relitigate this whole thing. But I'd made a deal. I'd made a vow to the Almighty that I would not do that. And I said, but the only way I can do this, Father, is if you will let me know where we're at. 6 months from now, a year from now, a year and a half from now, if she really hasn't changed, Father, you got to let me know. I can't live through another year and 2 months of this insanity. And so I felt a peace about it, that He would let me know. And so what's happened is, now fast forward 25 years, and so God totally redeemed and rebuilt my wife into this new person that's incredible. But what He did in me was He said, if you trust in my ability, it's about faith, and if you believe in me enough, then you can do that and you can extend that. And there'll be a day where you can trust your wife even more than you did prior to all this stuff happening. And that's exactly where we are at 25 years. Lisa sells real estate now. She's out showing houses. I mean, there's no way this could have ever happened in year one of this, journey that we're on, because I would have had the ability to just know that she wasn't somehow wanting to run into someone else's arms. But over the course of 25 years of not only embracing that forgiveness, but being able to extend that and now help others get through that process, my wife can go show a house and, she can work with men in her office and do these things she's doing. And I have no fear. I don't sit around and just think, I'll always have a little part of me that's always aware of where she's at and what she's doing. But she has made it so easy for me, because she's like, there's no secrets. Every passcode, every password, everything my life is about is an open book. And that's what got us through the process. So just to speak directly to anybody in your audience that has been through that, it only starts with you being able to somehow embrace the bigness of God to then be able to extend that to your wife. And look, it's going to be up to her whether she's going to find what she needs to do to help your marriage go. So I fully realize this is a two-way street here with people, but I'm telling you it's possible for you to have the forgiveness of God with your spouse or with someone else who's harmed you at that level, because I'm living it every single day.
Man, I really appreciate, obviously you've been very open about this, but for our audience, some of them are going to be surprised to hear that. And then a lot of this in our audience, Al, is not going to make sense, because forgiveness really doesn't make sense.
Right.
But if you think about it, the cross doesn't make sense. The gospel doesn't make sense. Why in the world would the ultimate injustice be done to the ultimate good human figure? Like that's why the story of the gospel is the most beautiful tragedy that we could possibly see, because it is a tragic event because of how unjust it is, but it is a gift for us. That's what makes the gospel sweet.
Yep.
So for this guy that has gotten to the point of, okay, forgiveness, and, as my buddy Pastor Joby Martin says, y'all have had on the show, and it was a new friend of the Unashamed podcast. He said, look, forgiveness isn't a feeling, it's a decision.
Yes.
Right? So you decide to forgive, and then you do the actions that forgiveness requires. Why? Because as God forgave you, you must forgive others, as much as that may suck. But you brought it up there a few times. That's your burden to carry. That's your cross to bear, if you will. But then there's the wife on the other side.
Yep.
Now, marriages can only end because of, according to God, according to death, infidelity, or abandonment.
Yep.
There are women that have the affairs and then they abandon the marriage.
Yep.
In that they stop working.
Right.
They basically get to a point where they're like, you know what? I've done the dog and pony show. We've done the counseling. We've gone to the retreats. We've heard the people speak. We've read the books. But you know what? This is who I am.
Yep.
Take it or leave it. This is kind of where we're at. And then it's almost like the guy has this attack, right? This internal consternation and dissonance to where it's like, well, she already broke the covenant, so biblically speaking, I'm good, but we've been quote unquote working on it for 2 or 3 years. She's gotten to the point where she's done working on it. And now if I leave, then I'm the guy that broke the marriage. I'm the guy that messed it up. And, again, we're worried about what people might think and, all those types of things. So again, 95% male audience, this has happened to a good chunk of these guys.
Yep.
And then they've got the woman that stops working. She's not holding up her end of the bargain. And as a man, you want to be able to do it for them, right? You want to be able to do the stuff for your kids, but if you do it for them, then they're not going to get better. And you want to do the stuff for your wife, but all you can do is clear the pathway for her to walk down, but she's got to walk down it. But if she's not doing it, what is a guy to do?
Well, and there may come a time when you can't stay married to someone. That's just the cold hard truth of it for the reasons you laid out. But here's the thing. Even if it gets to that point in your marriage, because it does take two working towards the same goal. And obviously, if you're doing this from a spiritual perspective, it's much more highly possible to do it because you're both going toward the same goal. But if you don't, and one or the other checks out of the marriage for whatever, maybe it was first an affair, now that's maybe not happening, but trust me, it always gets back to something like that, because this is what happens. The evil one has taken up residence and he isn't booted out, then, it's the old saying about what Jesus said about you kick out one and 7 more come in. This is where you're going to wind up. And I talk to a lot of people that go through divorce because of this very thing, even though they were trying so hard to do the right thing. But here's the thing. Here's the little secret you have to know. You still got to forgive her anyway, or else she still holds a burden on your heart, even if you divorced and the relationship is over. You still have to let go of that which holds you back and holds you down. And so that's what happens with most second marriages. That's why most end in divorce at a higher rate than the first one. Third is even higher. Fourth is even higher.
Yeah.
At some point, you have to let go of the evil one's clutches into your own heart and life, because you'll hold on to that bitterness even if they walk out the door, or even if finally you part ways, because it could not be worked out because both of you weren't trying to make it work. So either way, the principles I laid out are true. And sometimes that happens post-relationship, to not be held by that. It's like you mentioned about abuse earlier. I mean, a big part of Lisa's story, and in understanding the why, it's not trying to make excuses, but it's understanding
Yeah.
the why of she was the way she was and has been, is because part of that was 7 years of being molested by an uncle. Well, obviously, this man, even all these years later, had this grip on her life because of what he had done to her, and then all the shame that went along with that. Well, that had to be released, or else this man and his sin continued to have an impact on me, on my children, on my grandchildren, on all of it. And so she had to forgive him, and so did I. Now, we don't have a relationship with him. We don't want one. I don't want my kids or grandkids anywhere near this man. He's still out there. He's still alive. But at the same time, at some point, we had to let that go. And the only way we knew to do that was to put it at the foot of the cross. And so that's still the only thing big enough. And so, look, the honest truth is, you laid it out. Not every marriage can be saved. But if it can be, it can be not just, renewed and back to the way it used to be. We're talking about something new and better and different. I mean, Lisa and I almost feel like we have two marriages. We have the first 15 years, which a lot of good stuff happened, including my children. But then we have these last 25 that I can't tell you what it's grown to. In fact, to the place now where I'm like, as bad as everything I went through was, it has shaped us into what we're doing today. And so I wouldn't change anything, even though, a lot of hurt and pain went on during that first 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, with some of these stories that I know, to hear you talk like that, obviously you're talking from a place of experience. When you're walking through the valley of shadow of death, you can barely see in front of you. Well, this is I've used this with different people. If you've ever been on a trail with a crappy flashlight, you know what I'm about to say. So it's pitch black, there's no moon, you got this terrible flashlight, or the batteries are going dead, you're hitting it, and you're trying to show this flashlight up the trail. And when you show it up the trail, it's like, okay, I think the trail kind of bends to the left. Okay, that looks like it may be water there to the right. That's a bush, probably might be a bear. I think we'll figure it out when we get there. But you can't see anything as you're really looking forward. But if you point even that crappy flashlight down at your feet, you can see the next step.
Yeah.
And then you can see the next one. And that's the crappiest part about it, right?
Yeah.
Is if you have been sinned against in a way, especially like this, that's so egregious and so evil and so dark, it's hard to know exactly what to do. So if you wouldn't mind speaking to the guys in our audience, because guys, even if this doesn't apply to you right now, it could apply to you later, but I guarantee you it applies to a guy that's in your life. And so what Al's given you is tremendous golden wisdom as it pertains to these types of things. But to that guy that has done the things he's supposed to do, right? He's decided to forgive. He's acted out the forgiveness. He's not, as you pointed out perfectly, using that as a bludgeon or as an ace of spades in an argument to bring it up to, validate something inside of himself that's deficient or whatever. But he's got the mental strain. When he lays down at the end of the night and the whole house is quiet and everybody's asleep and he can't fall asleep, just running through his head is, I should have gotten even. You know what? I can still get even. I know where the guy is. Or I still can't believe she did that. And you're just haunted by the X's and O's of the deception and of the deceit and of the physicality of everything. And again, if we were in an honor-based culture, if this was 200 years ago, there'd be a bunch of dudes dead after duels, right? Because we would get our dueling pistols and one of us would be dead and the other one would just have to live with that, right? But we don't live in that culture. We live in the most litigious culture ever. If I poke you in the chest at the bar, I'm probably going to get sued for it, right? But to that guy that's just mentally unable to get past it, it's affecting his life. Maybe it's causing him some other problems with his health or addiction or whatever. What would you say to that guy, seeing as how you're a quarter of a century past it?
Well, first of all, you've got to realize that the reason Christ kept taking it back is any of us, even maybe in this situation, we're obviously the one who is aggrieved and this has been done to us, but all of us have done things we're not proud of, right? And we understand, therefore, which is why Jesus kept bringing it up, the power of what God has done in our own lives. And for me personally, I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that I had been the other guy in someone's marital relationship. Now, look, there were a lot of lies. She said they had been separated for a year, and that wasn't true. It was like a month, which means they were just having some trouble. And then all of a sudden, I blunder into this situation. Well, this guy was wanting to do to me exactly what you just described, Kyle. And look, the police involved in the situation thought he had every right to, because this is what you do, right? This is, someone is messing around with your wife. You either tap him on the beak or worse, because he was wanting to kill me that day. So I understood, even being that guy. So whenever you go forward another, in my case, almost 17 years after that, and then this was done to me, how was I going to react to this? Now, I had the same instincts. I drove over to this guy's house, when I first heard about it, and he wasn't there, and I'm glad he wasn't, because I was responding strictly as a human being in rage and one who was aggrieved and hurt. But over the time of the decision-making process, just like what you said Joby was talking about, I realized that's not the way Christ does business. He in fact, he says in Romans 12 to let him have the ultimate retribution in what happens. I mean, I have to trust in him. As far as it depends on me, I try to live at peace with everyone. So then I began to realize it wasn't my place to make this right. Even with my own wife, I couldn't do it anyway. Now, would I have felt better in the moment? Probably. But would it have been the right thing to do? Absolutely not. Could I have left my children without a dad because I was now in prison for something I did to this other person? Possibly. In that way, Satan continues to win this battle. You can't operate on satanic terms and expect to have godly results. It just will not happen. So you've got to realize that God has you in a position where you can handle more than you think you can handle. And so you've got to continue to try to do the right thing no matter what happens. And look, you may be the person that's in that. When this first happened, the next day, this was a Friday night that spilled into Saturday morning where the truth came out in my situation. And I literally, when Lisa left the house, because I wanted her out, she left. And when she left the house, my good friend John Godwin, who's on the Duck Dynasty and as well as one of my best friends, he just came and he parked himself in my living room for the next 2 or 3 days. And he was my sounding board. And everybody knows John knows that he doesn't speak a whole lot, but sometimes just being a listener is what you need. And so I was literally in a fetal position, wrapped up in an Afghan, because I was almost like I was in shock and just chilled, wondering about it. And he was there, and whenever I would just have needing to ramble and rant, and he would listen, and then he would pray for me, and he would listen, and he would listen. And I always thought everybody needs a John Godwin. And so no matter where this happens in your life, you may be one of those two people. You may be the person wrapped up in the Afghan, on the couch, or you may be the other person that's the listener and that says, look, I can't solve this for you, but I tell you what, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. And so, there are a lot of different ways to serve and to be served if something like this is going on in your life. And you've got to be willing to be that guy either way.
Okay, so we're gonna start wrapping to a close, put a bow in this conversation, because we got to leave some, we got to leave a little bit to the imagination for this summer. So guys, you can look forward to part 2 of this. I'm not going to call this part 1, but I'll come up with some sort of pithy title for that one. But for guys that are like, okay, I hear you. They've either been in this situation or they've got a friend in that situation. Like, how specifically can you and Lisa help them? What resources do you have? Because all this has been, gold. It's great advice and all those types of things. But guys that are wanting to go further, where would you direct them?
All right. Well, 2 things. One is you gotta look for a book that was a kind of a guiding light for Lisa first, and then later me. And it's from a guy named Joe Beam. And it's called Getting Past Guilt. And you can find it if you go to Amazon.
Guys, I'll put that in the show notes, okay?
Yeah, it really, really powerful. When it was written, it was called Forgiven Forever, and that title got me. And so Howard Publishing, which used to be based here in West Monroe, is the one who published it. And I'm telling you, this book, other than the Bible, impacted my life in a huge way. So get that, because that helps you understand the why of what Satan does, how he controls lives. And so Joe does an excellent job, very transparent. And the other thing is I would encourage people to then going from there, especially if you're doing post-affair and trying to figure out how to forgive in your own marriage, we have a book called A New Season, which you can also find. We wrote another one called Desperate Forgiveness. And both of these were written in a ministry aspects of what I just shared, but way more in depth, obviously, not only our story, but exactly how that goes forward to help. So, hey, our website is alanlisarobertson.com. We write blogs weekly, just trying to like talk about different things from our own life as well as things that could impact. So those are things that we offer and put out there to be able to help other people. But man, you don't have to go through it alone for sure, but you have to deal with it in your own house. And so you need all the help you can get to do that.
Well, Al, I appreciate that. I appreciate you being open on all that kind of stuff, but we're going to have to leave it there. But is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, just can't wait for you to get down here, have you on Unashamed, and continue this conversation. And look, Kyle, we're super proud of you, what you're doing. You and I have been friends for a few years now, and of course, you share the jiu-jitsu love with my son-in-law and what we're doing with that as well. And so I just couldn't be proud of you for living the life you're living, and just pray you continue doing that. And I'm grateful for your audience.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. And, Al, by the time I get down there, we might be in the same weight class, me and you. And so I can bring an extra gi. Maybe we can fight in the front yard. What do you think?
If we roll, I'll be tapping before we even get started. So it's all over.
Okay, we'll make sure that we live stream it and put it out there for everybody. Well, all right, Al, I appreciate you. We'll talk soon.
All right, thanks, Kyle.
There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed my time with Al Robertson. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So I've got a link here to Al and Lisa's website. So on that website, you can get access to all the books that he mentioned there. Also a link to the Duck Commander website, because obviously that's awesome. The Unashamed podcast, because that is where Al and Jace have kind of kept the momentum going of what them and their father had started. And then also I've got a link to that Amazon book that he talked about there from the other author. So all that stuff is right there in the show notes for you. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.